You need to calm down right now. Steady up. Don't you tell me to calm down. Ma'am, you need to follow the rules like everyone else on this plane.
She paid for her ticket. She had every right to her seat, yet within minutes of boarding, Dr. Maya Ellison, a respected neurosurgeon, was told to move so a white passenger could sit in first class. The humiliation was public, the sting unforgettable. But what the flight crew didn't know was that Maya's husband was Ethan Ellison, the acting head of the FAA. What happens when quiet dignity collides with arrogance thousands of feet in the air? What unfolds when a woman refuses to shrink, even as an airline tries to erase her presence? And how does one shocking moment on a plane spiral into a nationwide reckoning, rewriting the very rules of American aviation? This is not just a story about a seat. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the price of silence. It's about how one woman's calm defiance exposed the cracks in an entire system. Stay with us until the very end, because what began as humiliation would ignite reforms that change the skies forever. If you believe dignity should never be negotiable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's step into the story. The air in the first-class cabin always carried a certain performance. The faint citrus scent, the polished wood grain, the rustle of glossy magazines. It was designed to whisper comfort and exclusivity. But for Dr. Maya Ellison, it wasn't luxury that mattered. It was ritual. She sank into seat 1A, the coveted bulkhead window, the seat she booked 3 months in advance, the place that gave her a sense of control in a world that so often tried to deny her any. She let her bag rest by her legs, opened the leather cover of her well-worn poetry anthology, and released a slow exhale. It had been 4 relentless days in Washington, presenting her team's breakthroughs in neuroregenerative therapy at the National Institutes of Health. She'd spoken before scientists, senators, journalists. She had been praised, challenged, questioned. Her mind still hummed with data and faces, yet here, in 1A, she sought only silence. She smiled faintly, thinking of Ethan, her husband, her anchor. He was supposed to be in 1B. Instead, a last-minute video call with the Secretary of Transportation had delayed him. "I'll be on the next flight. Maya, I'll beat you to the hotel," he'd promised with that steady voice that had carried her through every storm. She believed him. She always had. For now, she allowed herself a pocket of solitude. She touched the edges of her book. Words were her way of decompressing from a week of being a scientist, a leader, a pioneer. Poetry let her remember she was still human. "Can I get you something to drink? Ma'am, champagne. Orange juice." The voice came from Brent Lawson, the young flight attendant with a starched collar and a too-practiced smile. His eyes flicked briefly to the empty 1B, then back to her. Maya caught the flicker but dismissed it. She was tired. "Just sparkling water with lime, please," she said softly. He nodded, polite, but there was a stiffness behind his expression. Boarding continued. Passengers shuffled in an older couple in coordinated travel jackets. A tech executive hunched over his phone, a young woman clutching a violin case as though it were a lifeline. Maya let the noise become background, her eyes tracing a line of poetry on the page before her. But then she felt it, a presence, hovering, waiting. She looked up. The woman standing over her wore bright resort clothes and impatience like perfume. Her blonde hair was perfectly set, her jewelry glinting beneath the cabin lights. Around her neck hung a diamond-encrusted C. "Excuse me," the woman said sharply. "You're in my seat." Maya blinked. "I don't believe so. This is 1A. "No," the woman snapped, thrusting a flimsy paper boarding pass toward her face. "This is mine." "So, You'll need to move." Maya's instinct was calm. Years in operating rooms had taught her not to react to sudden shocks. She offered a measured smile, the same one she used with anxious patients. "Perhaps you could check again. Mistakes happen with boarding passes." The woman's name glared from the paper, Catherine Walsh. Her lips curled. "Honey, I know how to read. I booked this seat because of my medical condition, deep vein thrombosis. Do you understand what that means?" Maya's eyes lingered briefly on Catherine's perfectly tanned, toned legs in designer sandals. She said nothing. Her phone was already in her hand, the airline's app glowing on the screen. "See here," Maya said evenly, turning the display. "Ellison, Maya, seat 1A. Confirmed." Catherine's face blotched red. The veneer of politeness cracked. "Don't you patronize me. You people always seem to find your way into places you don't belong." The words dropped like lead. "You people." Maya felt the familiar cold knot in her stomach. The same knot from med school when a professor questioned if her paper was really her work. The same knot when a patient's family once asked for a different doctor. Years of accolades meant nothing. In this woman's eyes, she was still reduced to "you people." Her voice cooled to steel. "I'm not sure who you mean by that, but I am a confirmed passenger in this seat. The flight attendant can clear this up." "Oh, he will," Catherine hissed, waving down Brent. "This woman has stolen my seat." Brent hurried over, smile stretched tight. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Catherine declared. "I have 1A, and this woman refuses to move." Brent turned to Maya, expectant. Maya lifted her phone again. "Here it is, booked months ago." Brent's eyes darted between Maya's digital pass and Catherine's paper reprint. He hesitated. Maya expected him to scan them, to check the manifest, to follow procedure. But instead, his focus lingered on Catherine's pass. Catherine leaned in. "I explained everything to Sandra at the gate." She understood. Unlike some people. The knot in Maya's stomach tightened. She recognized the pattern: an entitled passenger, a pliant gate agent, and now a crew member caught between truth and noise. Except he wasn't really caught. He was choosing. Brent's voice turned cautious. "Ma'am, sometimes the system duplicates seats." "Mrs. Walsh says she has a medical condition." Documented, Maya interrupted. "Did the gate agent see a doctor's note, or did she just take her word?" Catherine gasped theatrically. "Are you calling me a liar? I am a Diamond Elite member. Who are you? Do you even have status?" Maya's reply was quiet, measured, but every word cut. "My status is that of a paying passenger, and I expect the airline to honor it." The cabin had grown silent. Eyes turned. A phone was lowered, then discreetly raised again. Witnesses were watching. Brent's jaw tightened. He was unraveling. "Ma'am, I don't want an argument. We need to depart." "The gate agent reassigned this seat. I can offer you another seat," Maya asked. "First class is full. I saw the chart." "In main cabin," Brent said, his voice hardening. The words hit like a slap. Main cabin. From 1A to the back, from dignity to dismissal. Her pulse quickened, but her composure remained. "That is unacceptable. I want to speak to the captain." "He's busy," Brent said flatly. "Either you take the seat I'm offering or we deplane you. If you refuse a crew member's instructions, that's a federal offense." It was a threat. Weaponized policy. The man across the aisle muttered under his breath, "This is garbage. Not loud enough to matter." Maya scanned the faces around her. Catherine's smugness, Brent's brittle authority, the passenger's silence. She could resist, escalate, force security to come. But she knew how the narrative would spin. Angry black woman disrupts flight. The weariness sank in. She wanted to go home. She wanted to rest. So, with deliberate grace. Maya stood. She gathered her book, her tote. Her voice carried, calm but sharp. "You should know you're making a grave mistake." Brent gestured vaguely. "Seat 24B. Middle. The final indignity." The walk down the aisle felt like a punishment parade, from the curated air of first class to the cramped rows of economy. Eyes followed, some pitying, some contemptuous, most relieved the drama was over. She slid into 24B, squeezed between a student already barefoot and a man overflowing his seat. Her knees pressed tight to the tray table. She buckled in. Her hands shook only once as she pulled out her phone. One message. "To Ethan. They moved me. A woman lied. They gave her my seat. I'm in 24B. I have never been so humiliated. Please hurry." She hit send. The door sealed. The engines whined. And up in 1A, Catherine Walsh raised a glass of champagne in triumph. Maya sat in the cramped middle seat of row 24, her body tense but her face composed. She was a surgeon. She knew how to mask exhaustion, how to hold still when the inside screamed otherwise. But she felt the humiliation rising like heat along her neck. She thought of Ethan, steady and unyielding. He would tell her to breathe, to conserve her energy, to let the truth make its way out. Still, the bitterness lodged in her chest. She had been reduced, displaced, her dignity traded for someone else's noise. In the front of the aircraft, Catherine Walsh reclined in 1A with theatrical satisfaction. Every flick of her diamond bracelet seemed designed to remind the cabin she had won. She leaned toward Brent, whispering loudly enough for others to hear. "Some people just push their way into places they don't belong. I'm glad you handled it." Brent nodded, his smile strained, his conscience gnawing at him. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing final checks before departure. Passengers shuffled, settled, buckled. To most, it was just another flight. But for Maya, each second pressed heavier. She closed her eyes and summoned the voice of her late grandmother, who had once told her, "Dignity is a garment no one can strip from you unless you let them." She clung to that thought. She clung to the idea that this was not the end of her story. Her phone vibrated softly. She had nearly forgotten it in her lap. The text bubbles showed Ethan's replies, rapid and urgent. "What happened? Who touched you?" "Are you safe?" Maya typed back slowly, carefully. "I'm safe, but they gave my seat away. Catherine Walsh, Brent Lawson, Sandra Lopez at the gate. They said, medical condition. They pushed me to 24B. Please don't let this pass." There was a pause. Then Ethan's response came swift and sharp. "Stay calm. Don't argue further. I'm coming. Don't let them take off." Maya stared at the words. The engines were already humming, the pushback truck in place. Could he really stop it? She pictured him at his office desk in Washington, D.C., surrounded by files, calls, crises. But she also knew who he was. He was not just her husband. He was the acting administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, the man whose signature could ground fleets, whose voice could order pilots to stand down. A flicker of hope pulsed in her chest, tangled with fear. She didn't want him to use his position to save her from humiliation. She wanted the airline to have done the right thing from the start. But now, the wrong had been committed. And Ethan did not forgive easily when rules were broken. Meanwhile, Catherine enjoyed her charade. She gestured for another champagne, her voice rising so those around could hear. "I told you, it's dangerous for me not to have an aisle seat. They should really prioritize health needs over just booking systems, especially when some people abuse the process." The woman beside her, an older passenger with silver hair, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The silence around Catherine felt like endorsement, That silence was what emboldened her, what always emboldened people like her. Brent bent down to whisper, "We need to keep voices low. Ms. Walsh, the flight is nearly ready to go." Catherine laughed softly. "Of course. But you handled it well. She looked so out of place up here." Those words stung Maya even from 20 rows away. She didn't need to hear them to know they were spoken. She had lived their echoes her entire life. As the aircraft began its slow roll from the gate, Maya clutched her phone. A new message lit the screen. "Stop pushback. On my way. Tell no one yet." Her eyes widened. How could he? But then she remembered the FAA controlled the very heartbeat of flight. One order, one phrase spoken from the tower, and every wheel would halt. She felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation. Up front, Brent received a call through his crew interphone. His expression stiffened, his jaw tightening. He whispered to the captain, then glanced nervously toward 1A and back down the cabin. Catherine, oblivious, tapped her phone, scrolling through social media as though she had conquered the world. The aircraft stopped moving. Passengers looked up, puzzled. The engines hummed, but the plane sat idle. Whispers ran down the aisle. "What's going on? Are we delayed? Mechanical issue." Maya sat still, heart pounding. She knew. Ethan was coming. 15 minutes later, the cabin door cracked open again, a blast of cool air rushing in. Everyone turned. A tall man in a dark suit, his badge glinting on his lapel, stepped inside. His presence filled the narrow aisle. His eyes scanned the cabin, sharp and searching, until they landed on Maya in 24B. For a split second, the mask slipped. His face softened, his jaw clenched with restrained fury. Ethan Ellison, husband, federal chief, the man who held the skies in his command. He strode toward the cockpit, his voice measured but undeniable. "I am Ethan Ellison, acting administrator of the FAA. This aircraft is under federal review as of now. Captain, stand down." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Catherine's eyes widened, her glass of champagne frozen midway to her lips. Brent swallowed hard, his knuckles pale where he gripped his service cart. Passengers whispered furiously, phones rising higher now, cameras capturing every second. The drama that began as a petty dispute was unraveling into something far greater, something the world beyond this fuselage would soon see. Ethan turned to the cabin, his voice steady, resonant, the voice of both authority and a husband whose wife had been wronged. "This is not a simple seating error. This is a matter of discrimination, intimidation, and failure of duty, and it will not stand." Maya lowered her gaze, emotions colliding within her. Relief, vindication, shame, love. She hated that he had to come for her, hated that the world only respected her when they saw his power behind her. Yet she also felt the surge of pride, the fierce knowledge that together they were unbreakable. She thought, this fight was never supposed to be ours alone. Maybe tonight, the whole country will see what it really means when dignity is dismissed. The engines quieted, the flight attendants froze. The air inside the cabin grew thick with the weight of truth. And Catherine Walsh, who had believed entitlement would protect her, realized that her glass of champagne had turned to poison in her hand. The stage was set. The reckoning had begun. The cabin had gone still, as though the very oxygen in the aircraft had paused to see what would happen next. Ethan stood near the cockpit, his posture both calm and commanding. Passengers craned their necks to glimpse him. Cameras tilted higher, little red lights blinking as phones recorded. Somewhere in the back, a child whispered, "Who is he?" and his mother hushed him, though her own eyes stayed fixed on the tall figure in the aisle. Maya remained in 24B, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wanted to rise, to walk toward him, but she held back. This was no longer just her moment. It was about to become something much larger. Brent Lawson swallowed and stepped forward, the weight of the situation dawning on him. He had handled entitled passengers before. He had bent rules, offered quiet upgrades, shifted things around to keep the noise from spilling into chaos. But this was different. This was no longer a customer service matter. It was a federal confrontation, and he was at the center of it. Ethan's voice was low, firm. "Mr. Lawson, would you care to explain why my wife, a confirmed passenger in 1A, is sitting in row 24? The sound carried across the cabin. Brent's lips parted, but no words came at first. Catherine, seated in 1A, crossed her legs and smirked, as though convinced her version of the story would prevail. Brent cleared his throat. "Sir, there was an issue with the seat assignment. Mrs. Walsh indicated a medical need. The gate agent confirmed it. I was following procedure." Ethan's eyes did not waver. "Procedure requires documentation, verification. Did you see a doctor's note? Did you confirm with the manifest?" Brent's face flushed. He knew the truth. He had chosen the path of least resistance, siding with the louder voice. He had thought no one would challenge him. "He had been wrong," Catherine interjected, her tone sharp, defiant. "This is ridiculous. Why are we wasting time? The woman is fine back there. I have a condition. I deserve this seat." Ethan turned to her slowly, his expression composed but lethal in its clarity. "What you deserve, Mrs. Walsh, is to follow the same rules as every other passenger. You lied. You displaced someone who had every right to be here. And you did it with prejudice dripping from your tongue. This is not going to be ignored." A murmur ran through the cabin. Someone whispered. He said, "Prejudice." Another raised their phone higher, capturing Catherine's face as it tightened with indignation. Brent shifted nervously. "Sir, with respect, we were trying to avoid a scene." Ethan's gaze cut through him, and in doing so, you created a much larger one. You silenced the truth to pacify entitlement. That is not safety. That is complicity. The words struck Brent harder than any shout could have. His chest constricted. He looked at Maya, seated far back, her eyes steady, unwavering, filled with a pain he had helped cause. For the first time, shame swelled inside him, real and heavy. Catherine scoffed. "Are we seriously letting this bureaucrat lecture us? I'm a diamond elite. I have flown more miles than enough," Ethan said, his voice like steel snapping shut. The entire cabin hushed. Catherine's mouth closed mid-sentence, her face blanching. Ethan addressed the captain next. "Captain Riggs, as of this moment, your authority to depart is suspended pending FAA review. This flight will not move until corrective action is taken." The captain emerged briefly from the cockpit, his face tight with irritation. "Mr. Ellison, with all due respect, we have schedules. We have hundreds of passengers. Can we not resolve this quietly?" Ethan's jaw set. Quietly is how injustice festers. This will be resolved correctly, not quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger knew they were witnessing something that would live beyond this flight. Maya finally stood. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She walked the aisle slowly, each step measured, her dignity stitched back together with every pace. Passengers watched her, some averting their eyes, others holding them with quiet solidarity. She reached the front, her gaze settling first on Catherine. "You told me I didn't belong here," Maya said softly, yet her words rang clear. "But I do. My ticket says so. My life's work says so. And my dignity says so." Catherine bristled, her voice trembling. "You people always make everything about race. I was just protecting my health." Maya's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. If that were true, you wouldn't have needed to diminish me to justify it. Gasps rippled. A phone dinged. The cabin felt like a courtroom, and Catherine stood guilty before a jury of strangers. Ethan spoke again, his voice carrying finality. "Mrs. Walsh, you will leave this aircraft immediately. Mr. Lawson, you will be relieved of duty upon landing. Captain Riggs, you will report to FAA review at dawn. This airline will answer for its failures, and it will begin with accountability." Catherine sputtered, "You can't do this. You don't have the right." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she and the nearest rows could hear, though the tone still carried the weight of command. "You are speaking to the acting administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. I have every right." Her face drained of color. Her hand trembled as she reached for her bag. She rose unsteadily, glaring around as though seeking an ally. None came. Passengers shifted away, some glaring, some expressionless, most relieved to see her go. As Catherine was escorted down the aisle, the murmur of whispers grew. Phones recorded her departure. She tried to maintain composure, but the humiliation clung to her like a shadow she could not shake. Brent stood frozen, his hands at his sides. He wanted to protest, to explain, but words failed him. He knew explanations would not undo choices. Maya slipped into 1A again. She rested her hands on the armrests, inhaled deeply, reclaiming not just a seat, but the dignity that had been stolen. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not as a rescuer, but as a partner, affirming what was always hers. For the first time since boarding, Maya allowed her eyes to close, not in surrender, but in reclamation. She had been forced to walk the aisle of shame, but now she sat where she belonged, her presence undeniable, her truth unshaken. Ethan remained standing a moment longer, his gaze sweeping the cabin. "Let this be clear," he said. "This is not about status or miles flown or noise made. This is about dignity. Every passenger deserves it, and when it is denied, it will be corrected." The hush in the cabin deepened. Somewhere near the back, a passenger whispered, "Amen." The engines remained idle. The plane waited. The world outside was only beginning to learn what had happened inside. But within the cabin, the tide had already shifted. The truth had been spoken aloud, and it could not be unsaid. The door closed behind Catherine Walsh with a metallic finality. The cabin exhaled, though no one admitted it aloud. People shifted in their seats, some checking phones, others stealing glances at Maya, now seated in 1A again. Yet beneath the calm return to order was the lingering echo of humiliation. Not just Catherine's forced removal, but the wound carved into Maya's spirit. Maya adjusted her seatbelt, resting her hand over the worn leather of her tote. She sat upright, her face composed, but inside her chest a storm churned. It was not triumph she felt. It was something more complex, more raw. Yes, she had been restored to the seat she paid for. Yes, Ethan had defended her with the full weight of his authority. But the humiliation of being walked down that aisle, the whispers, the silence of strangers who had watched her dignity stripped away, could not be erased by simply sitting back in 1A. Her inner voice whispered the questions that had haunted her for years. Why does it always take exposure, power, intervention to be treated as an equal? Why couldn't the system work for me the way it works for others? She closed her eyes, pressing her palms together. She remembered the medical conference she had just left, where she had spoken about breakthroughs in neuroplasticity. Senators had applauded. Colleagues had praised her as a pioneer. Yet only hours later, inside a metal tube hurtling toward the sky, she had been reduced to a trespasser in her own seat. The contrast cut deep. Across the aisle, A young woman held her phone low, pretending to scroll but clearly recording. A man in 2C texted furiously, his face alight with the thrill of being the first to break a story. Whispers carried back through the cabin. "She's the FAA chief's wife. That woman called her you people." I got the whole thing on video. The humiliation was no longer private. It had become public, a spectacle. Maya imagined the headlines already forming, her face plastered across social feeds, strangers dissecting her pain like commentators at a sport. Ethan leaned down beside her, his voice pitched low for her alone. "Are you all right?" She forced a faint smile. "I've been better." His hand brushed hers gently, a gesture both tender and firm. "This isn't over. They'll answer for it." She nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the empty glass of water in front of her. A war raged inside her gratitude for Ethan's presence, shame that she had needed him, and sorrow that her quiet evening flight had become a battlefield. In the back, Catherine's absence still left an aftertaste. Passengers whispered about her arrogance, her downfall, how quickly her confidence had collapsed under the weight of truth. But for Maya, the humiliation had not been Catherine's alone. It had been hers too. Catherine had walked off with her privilege wounded, while Maya remained, her dignity scarred by the spectacle of being told she did not belong. Brent hovered near the galley, pale and shaken. His decision to side with Catherine played on loop in his mind. He had told himself he was protecting the flight, keeping peace, following the gate agent's word. But watching Ethan's eyes bore into him, hearing the word complicity spoken aloud, cracked something in him. He looked at Maya now in 1A, and guilt gnawed at him until his hands trembled. Captain Riggs remained in the cockpit, head set off, staring at the darkened tarmac. He resented the interruption, resented being undermined by a government official in front of his crew. Yet in some corner of his mind, he knew Ethan was right. His silence had let injustice pass as procedure. The engines were quiet. The ground crew stood idle outside. The plane waited for clearance, though clearance would not come until Ethan allowed it. The cabin had become a limbo, a suspended courtroom in the sky before takeoff. Maya's phone buzzed again. Friends and colleagues were already messaging her. Screenshots of social media posts, videos spreading across platforms. Her name had not yet surfaced, but her image had. A clip of Catherine saying "you people" was looping with captions, comments pouring in, outrage building. Her stomach tightened. This was not how she wanted her story told. She was a surgeon, a scientist, a woman who saved lives. Yet, once again, the world would see her first as a victim of prejudice. She wanted to vanish into anonymity, yet anonymity had already slipped away the moment Catherine opened her mouth. She thought of her patients, of the young girl she had operated on only weeks before, a child with a tumor pressing against her brainstem. The family had trusted Maya with everything, had wept with gratitude when the girl woke up able to move her fingers. That trust, that respect, that shared humanity wasn't that what life was supposed to be about, and yet here, on this flight, none of that mattered. Here, she had been judged not by her skill, her heart, or her worth, but by the color of her skin. She leaned back in her seat, whispering under her breath so softly only she could hear. "I won't let them define me by this." Ethan sat beside her now, finally sliding into 1B. His presence was grounding, like a pillar she could lean on. He scanned the cabin, his expression unreadable, but his hand remained close to hers. She knew he was already calculating the consequences, already drafting the outlines of the storm he would unleash on the airline. But for Maya, the fight was different. His was about power, rules, accountability. Hers was about healing the wound of humiliation, a wound invisible to most but heavy as stone in her chest. She gazed out the window, the runway lights stretching like stars along the ground. She asked herself the question that had haunted her since childhood, from playground taunts to boardroom dismissals. How many times must I prove that I belong? The answer never came. Only the steady thrum of the idle engines, only the murmurs of passengers who now saw her differently, not just as another traveler, but as the woman at the center of a storm. The humiliation had been public, undeniable, but what they did not see was the strength it took for her to remain calm, to walk that aisle with her head high, to reclaim her seat with grace rather than fury. That strength was hers alone. It was the part of her story no headline could capture. The flight had not yet lifted off, but the world outside was already watching. Maya knew this was only the beginning. Ethan Ellison had learned long ago how to divide himself in two. There was Ethan the husband, the man who cooked Sunday breakfasts for Maya, who laughed with her at old jazz records, who still carried a photograph of her from their college days in his wallet. And then there was Ethan the federal chief, the acting administrator of the FAA, the man whose name alone could halt departures across the eastern seaboard. Most of the time, he balanced the two identities with ease, slipping between them like coats on a rack. But tonight, on this aircraft, the two selves collided, and there was no room for separation. As he sat beside Maya in 1B, Ethan kept his expression neutral, but inside him anger flared hot. He had seen discrimination countless times, had read report after report of bias in travel, but reading reports and watching his wife walk the aisle in humiliation were not the same thing. The sight of her squeezed into a middle seat while another woman sipped champagne in her place had carved into him deeper than any statistic ever could. He reached for Maya's hand. Her fingers were steady, her face calm, but he knew the storm beneath. He had seen it before, in hospital boardrooms where her expertise was questioned, in conferences where men interrupted her with condescension. Each time she had risen above, carried herself with dignity that silenced doubters, yet he also knew the cost of that strength. Tonight, he would not let her carry it alone. He pulled out his phone, opened the secure FAA channel. With a few words, he could ground the airline's fleet until further notice. The thought flashed through him like lightning. But he paused. He was still Ethan the husband, and Maya mattered more than revenge. He had to tread carefully. His job demanded measured judgment. His heart demanded swift justice. Across the aisle, Brent Lawson lingered, avoiding eye contact. Ethan's voice cut through the quiet cabin. "Mr. Lawson, bring me the flight manifest. Now." Brent startled, fumbling for his tablet. His hand shook as he opened the roster, the passenger list glowing on the screen. He handed it over like an offering to a judge. Ethan scanned it, his eyes sharp. Seat 1A Ellison, Maya. There it was. Undeniable. He passed it back, his expression unreadable. "You knew, and you chose to ignore it." Brent's mouth opened, but no excuse came. The silence that followed was its own admission of guilt. Maya closed her eyes briefly, as if to shut out the sting. She hated scenes like this, hated the spotlight, but she also knew silence was not an option. Her dignity had already been stolen once tonight. She would not let it slip away again. From the cockpit, Captain Riggs emerged, his jaw tight. "Mr. Ellison, sir, this flight is being delayed. We need resolution. Passengers are growing restless. Can we come to some understanding?" Ethan turned slowly, his voice level. "Resolution is accountability. Understanding is justice. Until those are delivered, this aircraft goes nowhere." The captain bristled, unused to having his authority checked. But he saw the certainty in Ethan's eyes and retreated, knowing further resistance would end his career tonight. Passengers whispered furiously, phones still raised. Some supported Maya openly. A woman in row 5 leaned forward and said, She deserves her seat. We all saw what happened. Others muttered about delays, about missed connections, yet even in their frustration, few dared voice support for Catherine. The truth had been too clear. Maya turned to Ethan, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. I don't want them to see me as someone who needed rescuing. Ethan met her gaze, his features softening for the first time that night. They'll see you for what you are, stronger than any of them, but they'll also see me, and they'll know that when one of us is wronged, both of us fight. She looked at him, her chest tightening with conflicting emotions, gratitude, love, exhaustion, sorrow. She whispered, I just wanted a quiet flight. His thumb brushed her knuckles gently, and you will have many more. But tonight, quiet is not what they gave you. Tonight, we make noise. Back in the galley, Brent spoke quietly to another attendant, his voice barely audible. He's going to ruin us. He's going to ruin me. The other attendant only shook his head, unwilling to wade into the storm. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Messages from colleagues at FAA headquarters were pouring in. The story had already begun spreading beyond the fuselage. Reporters were reaching out. Videos were gaining traction online. The storm had escaped the cabin, and now it was sweeping across the country in real time. He typed back quickly, document everything, prepare for public statement, hold all departures by this airline until I confirm. Maya watched him work, the efficiency of his authority. A part of her admired it, the clarity of his resolve. Another part of her mourned that it was necessary. Why did her dignity always need the weight of federal power to be protected? She leaned toward him, whispering so only he could hear. Promise me this won't just be about punishment. Promise me it will mean something more. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and nodded. It will mean change. Outside the aircraft, the ground crew received new instructions. The flight was officially delayed indefinitely. Inside, tension thickened, but so did awareness. Passengers were no longer simply restless travelers. They were witnesses to something bigger than themselves. Maya gazed out the window at the runway lights, the reflection of her own face faint against the glass. She thought of the girl she had once been, the young student told she wasn't doctor material, the intern mistaken for a janitor in hospital halls. She thought of all the times she had swallowed humiliation, chosen silence to survive. Tonight she was no longer silent. Tonight she was seen. Her humiliation had not disappeared. It clung to her still, but alongside it grew something new, something steady. The knowledge that her pain would not be wasted, that Ethan's fury, the passengers' videos, the world's outrage together, they would form something larger, something lasting. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, taut with restrained bitterness. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an operational delay. Please remain seated. Updates will follow. The truth of that bland announcement rippled through the cabin like an open secret. Everyone knew the delay had nothing to do with weather or maintenance. It had everything to do with the woman in 1A and the man beside her. Maya turned her hand in Ethan's, gripping his fingers tightly. In her eyes was a silent vow this would not break her. This would build her. And Ethan, his own jaw firm, understood that his anger was no longer just his own. It belonged to every traveler who had been diminished, every passenger who had been told they did not belong. Tonight, he was not only a husband, he was a reckoning. The plane remained motionless on the tarmac, a silver shell holding hundreds of lives in suspension. The hum of the engines had faded into silence. Inside, passengers shifted restlessly, their murmurs filling the air like low thunder. Some craned their necks toward the front, others tapped impatiently at their phones, but most could feel that what they were witnessing was no ordinary delay. The cabin door opened again. A rush of night air swept in, cool and sharp, carrying with it the presence of authority. Two uniformed airport supervisors stepped inside, followed by a woman in a navy suit with a badge clipped to her blazer. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, her posture brisk and efficient. She introduced herself without raising her voice, but the way she carried herself made everyone listen. "My name is Janet Morales, Senior Operations Manager for Trans-American Airlines. We have been instructed to assess the situation immediately." Her gaze landed on Ethan first. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She had seen his face in industry briefings, had heard his voice in safety directives. She adjusted her tone instantly, deferential but wary. "Miss Ellison, we were informed you intervened in the boarding process. May we step into the galley to discuss?" Ethan did not move. His voice was measured, controlled, but each syllable carried steel. "We will discuss here, in front of the passengers. They deserve to hear what accountability looks like." A ripple passed through the cabin. Passengers straightened, phones raised higher. Janet hesitated, then nodded. She turned toward Maya, her tone softening. "Dr. Ellison, I want to personally apologize for any discomfort." Maya's eyes were steady, unflinching. "Discomfort is turbulence. This was humiliation. Call it what it is." The woman faltered, her corporate script unraveling. Ethan stepped closer, his presence filling the aisle. "Your gate agent, Sandra Lopez, knowingly reassigned my wife's confirmed seat to another passenger without documentation. Your lead attendant, Brent Lawson, enforced that decision and threatened her with removal if she resisted. Your captain allowed it to proceed without verification. Do you dispute any of these facts?" Janet's throat tightened. I cannot dispute until I review." "Then don't waste our time." Ethan cut in. His voice wasn't raised, but the weight of it pressed down like gravity. "This flight will not depart until there are consequences, and those consequences begin tonight." From row 6, a man in business attire muttered, finally, someone saying it straight. His words carried, drawing nods from others. Brent stood frozen near the galley, his skin pale. Every syllable felt like a blade cutting closer to his career. He wanted to speak, to defend himself. But each time he opened his mouth, the shame strangled the words. He remembered the moment Catherine Walsh had barked about her medical condition, remembered the way he chose to believe her rather than the quiet truth of Maya's phone screen. He had thought he was avoiding conflict. Now he understood he had created one larger than anything he could contain. Janet gestured toward Brent. "Mr. Lawson, please step aside. You'll be relieved from service on this flight." The announcement echoed across the cabin like a verdict. Brent's chest deflated. He stepped back, pressing himself against the galley wall. His eyes glazed with humiliation. Ethan wasn't finished. He turned his gaze toward the cockpit, his voice sharp. "Captain Riggs, step out." The captain emerged reluctantly, his jaw tight with defiance. "Mr. Ellison, with respect, I run this aircraft." "Not tonight, you don't," Ethan replied evenly. "Not when you condone discrimination. Not when you place convenience over justice. As of this moment, you are suspended from command pending FAA investigation." The captain's face flushed crimson. He wanted to argue, to reclaim his authority, but the eyes of hundreds of passengers burned into him. His reputation, his career, his command, all hung by a thread. He retreated without a word, vanishing back into the cockpit like a soldier dismissed in disgrace. Maya sat quietly in 1A, her posture tall, her face calm, though inside she trembled at the spectacle. She hated the cameras, hated the gawking faces, hated that her pain had become performance. Yet she also understood its necessity. Without witnesses, her humiliation could have been erased, buried in the airline's paperwork. Now it was undeniable. Ethan turned back to Janet, his tone final. "This flight will return to the gate. All passengers will deplane. Replacement crew will be assigned, and your airline's leadership will meet me within the hour." The cabin erupted. Some groaned at the delay. Others cheered. Many whispered to each other, their phones buzzing with notifications as video spread. The spectacle was alive, unstoppable. Janet stiffened, her professional mask faltering. "Mr. Ellison, with respect, this will cause a major disruption." "Good," Ethan said coldly. "Perhaps disruption is the only language your airline understands." The aircraft shuddered as the tug latched on, dragging it slowly back to the gate. Passengers stared out the windows, the terminal lights growing closer. A few cheered softly, as though watching justice made flesh. Maya pressed her hand to her chest, her heartbeat heavy. The walk down the aisle replayed in her mind like a wound that refused to close. Even seated again in 1A, with her husband's authority vindicating her, the humiliation lingered. Yet alongside it, another feeling grew. Not pride exactly, but resolve. If her pain had to be made public, then she would ensure it mattered. As the plane docked, the door opened to a wave of flashing lights. Word had already reached the press, and cameras clustered near the gate. Reporters shouted questions, microphones extended, hungry for sound bites. Maya froze. This was not the life she wanted, not the spotlight she sought. She wanted to heal people quietly, to build her work in labs and hospitals, not in headlines. But now, like it or not, she had become a symbol. Ethan stood, his hand brushing hers gently before he moved toward the door. His face was carved with determination. He had fought battles in Washington, but this was personal, and personal battles always burned brighter. Passengers began to deplane, some grumbling, others thanking Maya quietly as they passed. A woman paused by her row, her voice trembling. "You handled yourself with such grace. Thank you for not letting them push you aside." Maya nodded silently, gratitude mixing with the ache in her chest. At the gate, chaos erupted. Airline staff scrambled, reporters shouted, cameras flashed. Ethan raised his hand, silencing the crowd with a single gesture. His voice carried above the noise, calm, yet thunderous. This was not a mistake. This was a violation, and it will have consequences. Maya followed slowly behind, her shoulders straight, her eyes forward. Each step felt heavy with the knowledge that her humiliation had become a public reckoning. But if it had to be so, then she would carry it with dignity. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this night was no longer just about her. It was about every passenger who had ever been told they didn't belong. The gate was a storm. Cameras flashed, passengers crowded against the windows, and the voices of reporters collided like waves. Dr. Maya Ellison and her husband Ethan emerged into that chaos, and in that moment the story was no longer confined to a single aircraft. It was already spilling across screens worldwide. Inside the terminal, people stopped mid-stride to glance at the videos flooding social media. Clips of Maya being reassigned to row 24, of Ethan confronting the crew, of Brent standing speechless as his authority crumbled. All of it was replaying with captions that asked one question: how could this still happen in America within minutes? Hashtags exploded. Seat 1A trended first, then Yar Ellison Justice, and finally the sharper, angrier one, Og Flying While Black. Millions of viewers shared their own stories under the tags. Flight attendants of color described being undermined by supervisors. Passengers wrote of being downgraded, ignored, or spoken to with disdain. The incident with Maya had become more than a single injustice. It was a mirror reflecting a pattern. Maya sat in a quiet conference room adjacent to the gate, separated from the frenzy by glass walls. Security officers had guided her there at Ethan's insistence. The hum of voices outside felt like a rising tide, She clasped her hands together, staring at her wedding ring as though it could ground her. She hated that her pain was viral content now. She hated that strangers debated her dignity in comment sections. Yet she also knew that silence had never been an option. Ethan paced the room with the steady rhythm of a man who had been here before. He had fought senators, grounded fleets, and overseen crises. But this was different. Every clip carried not just his authority, but his wife's humiliation. That made it personal in a way that Washington hearings never could. He stopped and looked at her. "Are you ready for what comes next?" She lifted her eyes, tired but unwavering. "Do I have a choice?" Outside the glass, Brent Lawson was being escorted away by supervisors. His face was hollow, his shoulders slumped. Passengers hurled insults as he passed. Once, he had thought of himself as a professional, the kind of flight attendant who smoothed conflicts. Now he was the villain in millions of timelines. Captain Riggs was next. Uniform still pressed, chin raised. He tried to carry dignity as security walked him down the concourse. But the phones followed, recording his every step, the sound of booze following like a shadow. His authority had collapsed in a single night. Catherine Walsh, the passenger who had stolen the seat, sat off to the side, shielded by two airline agents. Her face was blotched with anger and disbelief. She shouted that she had a condition, that she had been mistreated, that she was the true victim. But her words landed like stones dropped in the ocean. No one cared to listen. In a downtown office tower hundreds of miles away, Richard Caldwell, CEO of Trans-American Airlines, sat in his corner suite, surrounded by executives. It was nearly midnight, but no one had left. Every wall screen displayed the same thing, videos of Maya and Ethan, captions streaming across the bottom. Stock prices dipped in real time, red numbers ticking down. Caldwell rubbed his temples and muttered, "We are bleeding." His communications chief spoke quickly. "We need a statement within the hour. Deny wrongdoing, express concern, promise a full review." Classic containment, but Caldwell's legal counsel shook his head. "That won't hold. This isn't rumor. This is documented, streamed live, witnessed by hundreds. We are exposed not just to public outrage, but to regulatory retaliation. He's the acting FAA administrator. He can cripple us overnight." The room fell silent at that truth. Ethan Ellison wasn't just an angry husband. He was the man who could ground their fleet, revoke certificates, trigger investigations that would paralyze operations. Caldwell leaned back, exhaling slowly. He was a man who had built his career balancing profit with optics, smoothing scandals with payouts and apologies. But this scandal had a different edge. It was sharp, public, and tied directly to power he could not buy. "Set up a call with him," Caldwell said at last. "No lawyers, no PR, just him and me. Tonight, back at the airport." Maya scrolled through her phone reluctantly. Her inbox was overflowing with messages, friends checking in, colleagues offering support, strangers thanking her for standing firm. But alongside them were the darker notes: mockery, denial, even threats. She closed the screen, her stomach twisting. "I never wanted this," she whispered. Ethan sat beside her. "I know, but sometimes we don't choose the battles. They choose us." Her eyes welled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "I just wanted to get home." "I know," he said softly, "and now the whole world wants to know why you couldn't." The door opened. Janet Morales stepped in, pale and rigid. "Mr. Ellison, Mr. Caldwell has requested an immediate video call." Ethan stood, his jaw set. "Good. Let's not waste time." They followed Janet to a secure office upstairs. A large monitor glowed against the wall, connecting to Trans-American's headquarters. Richard Caldwell appeared, silver-haired, suit impeccable, even at midnight. His expression was grave, a man calculating not just the damage, but the cost of survival. "Mr. Ellison, Dr. Ellison," he began smoothly. "First, allow me to apologize on behalf of Trans-American Airlines. What you experienced tonight is unacceptable." Maya's lips tightened. The words sounded polished, but not sincere. Ethan answered for them. "An apology is meaningless without accountability. 2 of your employees are already suspended. A third, a gate agent, will face review. But this isn't about individuals alone. It's about the culture you lead." Caldwell inclined his head. "I agree, which is why I want to invite you to collaborate with us on meaningful reform. We can turn this moment into progress." Maya's voice broke in for the first time. "You only say that because your stock is bleeding." The CEO blinked. Her tone was calm, but it cut sharper than any accusation. "Dr. Ellison, I understand your anger." "It's not anger," she said firmly. "It's exhaustion. Exhaustion from being told in 1,000 little ways that I don't belong. Tonight was just the loudest version of it. You can't fix this with a task force or a press release." Silence stretched. Caldwell's executives whispered off-screen, their faces tight with unease. Ethan leaned forward. "Here are the terms. Immediate termination of the employees involved. A public acknowledgement not of error, but of discrimination. A binding commitment to anti-bias training for every crew member annually. A hotline for passengers to report misconduct, with independent oversight. And one more thing, a fund to support underrepresented students in aviation, financed directly by your company." Caldwell's jaw tensed. These demands were not cosmetic. They were structural, expensive, and public. Agreeing would be a surrender, but refusing could mean annihilation. He tried to hedge. "Mr. Ellison, surely we can negotiate details." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You don't have details. You have hours before markets open. Choose." The room on Caldwell's side fell silent. The CEO knew he had been cornered. Behind him, red numbers scrolled like a countdown. Finally, he exhaled, agreed, on all terms. "Draft the framework tonight." Maya sat back, her chest rising and falling. She had not asked for power, but now it was wielded in her name. Her humiliation was becoming policy. Her pain turned into reform. The call ended. Silence lingered in the room. Maya pressed her hands together, whispering almost to herself, "Let it matter. Please let it matter." Ethan reached for her hand, his voice steady. "It already does." Outside, reporters were still gathered, and the internet churned louder by the minute. The story was no longer about a single seat. It was about justice, about accountability, about whether dignity was negotiable at 30,000 feet. And by dawn, the world would know the answer. The night bled into morning without pause. By the time the first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, Dr. Maya Ellison had not slept. She sat in a quiet hotel room near the airport, staring at the muted television. Every major network had led with her story. Her face filled the screen, captured mid-stride as she left the terminal. The caption screaming across the bottom: "Black woman denied seat for white passenger, FAA chief intervenes." The sound was muted, but she didn't need the volume. The images told the story. Footage of her being reassigned to row 24 played again and again. Clips of Ethan confronting the captain replayed in endless loops. Analysts in bright studios debated the fallout, some calling it a watershed moment, others framing it as yet another scandal in a long line of airline missteps. Maya pressed her palms together, her fingers trembling. She had spent her life mastering precision under pressure, cutting into the most fragile of human tissues with calm hands. But this storm of public scrutiny felt beyond her control. She was no longer a surgeon in an operating room. She was a symbol. Ethan entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot, but his posture remained firm. He set 1 cup in front of her. "The boardroom meets at 9. Caldwell will be there. So will the press." Maya looked up at him, her voice quiet. "And us." "Yes," Ethan said. "We'll be there too. They won't expect you, but they need to see you." Her stomach tightened. "I don't want to be paraded like proof. I don't want to be their redemption story." Ethan sat beside her, his hand brushing hers. "I know, but your presence is power. Without it, they'll rewrite the narrative by noon." She nodded reluctantly. Part of her longed to hide, to retreat into the sanctuary of her hospital, her patients, her work. But she knew he was right. Silence would be filled by others, and their version would not hold the weight of her truth. At the same moment, across the city in Transamerican headquarters, executives shuffled into a gleaming boardroom. The air was thick with tension. Richard Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his jaw clenched. Overnight, the company had lost nearly 6% of its market value. Investors were calling, regulators were circling, and hashtags showed no sign of fading. He had weathered crises before storms, crashes, labor strikes, but never one so personal, so entangled with the face of his airline. Never one where the victim sat across the table, holding more moral authority than any shareholder. By 9, Ethan and Maya arrived. The room hushed as they entered. Caldwell rose, extending his hand, but Maya did not take it. Instead, she pulled out her chair and sat with deliberate calm. Cameras clicked from the corner, reporters waiting for sound bites. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellison? Mr. Ellison? Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Before we begin, allow me once again to offer my deepest apologies." Maya's eyes met his. Apologies are currency that's spent cheap when unbacked by action. The words hung in the air like smoke. Reporters scribbled furiously. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's face stiffened, but he nodded. "Then let us discuss action." Ethan laid out the framework he had dictated the night before the immediate termination of Brent Lawson, Captain Robert Riggs, and gate agent Sandra Lopez, a permanent no-fly designation for Catherine Walsh, public acknowledgement of systemic bias, annual anti-bias training, an independent hotline, and a $25 million scholarship fund for underrepresented students in aviation. The CFO winced at the number. $25 million is excessive. We could allocate Ethan, cut him off. Excessive. Do you know what's excessive? Asking a black woman with a confirmed ticket to give up her seat for a white passenger? Do you know what's excessive? Humiliating her in front of hundreds, and then trying to sweep it under the rug. This fund isn't charity. It's restitution. It's investment in a future where this doesn't happen again. Silence followed. Maya sat with her hands folded, her posture regal despite the fatigue lining her face. She could feel every eye on her, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some calculating the cost. Finally, Caldwell spoke, approved. All of it. The decision was recorded, the press briefed. By noon, Transamerican issued a public statement. For the first time in its history, the airline acknowledged not just error, but discrimination. They pledged reforms, listed names of those terminated, and announced the scholarship fund in Maya's name. The internet erupted again. Some praised the boldness. Others accused the airline of desperation. But the weight of acknowledgement could not be undone. Maya watched the statement unfold from the side of the boardroom. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a heavy exhaustion. She had not asked for this fight, but now her name was attached to it forever. After the briefing, Reporters swarmed. Questions flew. Dr. Ellison, do you forgive the airline? Do you believe this will spark wider change? What message do you have for other passengers of color? Maya paused, the microphones crowding near her face. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Dignity is not optional. It is not a courtesy. It is a right. If this moment teaches us anything, let it be that. Her words traveled instantly across screens, clipped into sound bites, repeated endlessly. The phrase became a refrain, echoed in headlines, plastered across trending hashtags. That evening, as the city glowed beneath the setting sun, Maya finally returned to her hospital office. The familiar scent of antiseptic, the quiet hum of machines, the walls lined with charts. This was her sanctuary. She sank into her chair, closing her eyes for the first time that day. But even there, she could not escape the echoes. Nurses passed by, whispering her name. Colleagues sent messages of pride. Patients' families left cards of gratitude at her door. She had become more than a surgeon now. She was a symbol, and symbols carried weight. She opened her laptop, staring at the news. Images of Catherine Walsh circulated, her face twisted in indignation as she shouted at reporters outside her home. Neighbors turned away. Colleagues distanced themselves. Catherine's privilege had curdled into isolation. Brent Lawson released a statement through a lawyer, apologizing for his role, but claiming he had only followed procedure. The internet showed little mercy. His name was now synonymous with cowardice. Captain Riggs remained silent, but insiders whispered his pilot's license would be revoked. Sandra Lopez's termination was already effective, and Richard Caldwell, once untouchable, now faced shareholders demanding deeper reform. His leadership hung in the balance. Maya closed the laptop. The noise of the world would not stop. But for a moment she allowed herself silence. She thought of the seat, of the walk down the aisle, of the eyes that had burned into her. She thought of the patients she had healed, the hours spent steadying her hands in operating rooms. She thought of the strength it took not to break. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. We did what we had to. Rest now. Tomorrow. The work continues. She set the phone down, leaning back. For the first time since the ordeal began, she let her eyes close. The storm outside raged on, but within her a small measure of peace settled. She had endured, and because she had, others might not have to. By the following week, the incident had grown into something far larger than one airline. It was no longer just Transamerican's crisis. It had become aviation's reckoning. News outlets dissected every angle. Panels on morning shows debated corporate accountability, systemic bias, and the responsibilities of crew at 30,000 feet. Newspapers ran op-eds calling for sweeping reforms. The words Maya had spoken at the board meeting were quoted in headlines across the country. Dignity is not optional. The phrase appeared on protest signs outside airports in New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles. Activists rallied not just against Transamerican, but against every airline that had allowed bias to go unchecked. Former passengers shared videos of similar humiliations. Lawsuits were reopened, petitions circulated. What had started with one stolen seat had sparked a movement inside Washington. Ethan moved quietly but decisively. His dual role as husband and acting FAA administrator gave him both personal passion and institutional power. He convened a task force, summoning airline executives, union leaders, and civil rights advocates into one room. The message was blunt: comply with new standards or face regulatory intervention. Some executives bristled. One airline CEO muttered that it was an overreaction, that this was just one unfortunate incident blown out of proportion. Ethan's eyes locked on him, unblinking. Incidents are accidents, This was a choice, and choices reveal culture. If you refuse to change, you will not fly. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the most resistant executives understood the threat was not empty. Back in her hospital, Maya tried to return to her work. She donned her scrubs, walked sterile hallways, focused on patients. In the operating room, her hands moved with practiced steadiness, but her mind was never fully free. Nurses whispered encouragement. Patients asked for selfies. Interns lingered, hoping to absorb wisdom not only from a surgeon, but from a woman who had stood up to injustice. She wanted to sink into the rhythm of medicine, to be defined again by her skill, not by a headline. Yet every day brought reminders that her life had changed. Flowers arrived from strangers. Letters filled her mailbox. Stories of people who had been silenced, who now felt they had a voice because she had refused to give up her seat. One evening, after a particularly long surgery, Maya sat in her office, staring at the stack of letters. She opened one from a teenage girl in Detroit. "My mom was told to move seats last year. She didn't fight back. I saw your video. Now I know we don't always have to accept it. Thank you for being brave." Maya pressed the letter to her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She had not sought to be anyone's hero. But perhaps this was the work she had been chosen for, whether or not she wanted it. Meanwhile, the backlash brewed. On talk radio and certain corners of social media, voices raged against what they called overcorrection. Commentators accused Maya of overreacting, of seeking fame, of playing a victim. They dissected her career, her family, her finances. They mocked Ethan as a power-hungry bureaucrat. Maya saw some of the vitriol online late one night, her hand frozen on the trackpad. She felt a familiar ache in her chest. No matter how much dignity she carried, there were always those eager to strip it away. She closed the laptop, whispering to herself, "You knew this would come." The next morning, Ethan found her silent at the breakfast table, her coffee untouched. "You read the comments, didn't you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, but he knew. He reached for her hand. They attack because they're afraid. Change threatens comfort. Let them rage. We will keep building. She met his eyes, weary but resolute. "I just don't want bitterness to consume me." "Then don't let it," he said gently. "We can fight with firmness and still keep compassion. That's the difference." Across the industry, change began to show. Airlines quietly announced new training initiatives. A few even invited Maya to speak at internal conferences, though she declined every time. She was not interested in becoming their PR tool. What mattered to her was that reforms were real, not cosmetic. At Transamerican, the $25 million scholarship fund took shape. Applications opened, and within hours, thousands of students from underrepresented backgrounds applied. The idea that one act of humiliation could be transformed into opportunity gave Maya a fragile but genuine sense of hope. Still, resistance remained. A coalition of flight attendants filed a grievance, arguing that employees were being scapegoated without due process. Catherine Walsh, the passenger whose entitlement had ignited the incident, attempted a lawsuit claiming emotional distress. Her case was swiftly dismissed, but the spectacle of her defiance filled tabloids. Late one evening, as Maya walked home from the hospital, she noticed her reflection in a store window. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. She was the same woman who had bought a ticket to San Francisco weeks ago, just wanting to reach her destination. Yet now she was something else entirely. At home. Ethan waited with documents spread across the dining table. "The Senate committee wants your testimony," he said. Maya's heart sank. Testimony. "They want to hear directly from you. This isn't just about Transamerican anymore. They're looking at nationwide policy." She rubbed her temples. "Ethan, I'm a surgeon, not a politician, not an activist." He walked to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're a human being who was humiliated for no reason other than prejudice. That makes your voice the most powerful in the room. You don't have to be an activist, you just have to be you." She sat down heavily. The thought of speaking before senators, of reliving the ordeal on national television, made her stomach twist, yet deep inside, she understood what he meant. Her truth was not abstract. It was lived. It was raw. It was undeniable. "I'll think about it," she whispered. The weeks ahead promised more storms, more scrutiny, more weight than she had ever asked to carry. But as she sat there, Ethan beside her, she realized something vital. Dignity was not just a right, it was also a responsibility. To claim it, to defend it, to ensure it for others. The stolen seat had become a movement, and whether she wanted it or not, she was at the center of it. The Senate chamber was colder than Maya Ellison had imagined. The marble walls carried a chill that even the crowded room could not warm. Photographers clicked their cameras, flashes reflecting off polished wood and brass. Senators filled the dais, their nameplates gleaming under the lights. Rows of spectators, activists, and airline lobbyists sat behind velvet ropes. Their whispers hushed as the clock ticked toward the hearing's start. Maya sat at the witness table, a microphone angled toward her, a small placard bearing her name. Her palms pressed lightly against the surface, steadying herself. She wore a navy suit, simple earrings, her hair tied neatly. Every detail of her appearance had been scrutinized, debated by colleagues and friends, but she had insisted on one thing: she would not be costumed. She would come as herself, not as the image others wanted. Ethan sat directly behind her, his presence both professional and personal. Though today he was not acting FAA administrator, but a husband watching his wife step into the public eye in a way she had never wanted. His eyes followed her every movement, as if by sheer will he could shield her from the weight of the room. The chair of the committee, Senator Hughes, rapped the gavel. "This hearing will come to order. We are here to examine systemic discrimination in the airline industry, prompted by recent events involving Dr. Maya Ellison." Maya's name echoed in the chamber, drawing every gaze toward her. For a heartbeat, the noise of her memory returned the walk down the aisle, the whispers, the sting of humiliation. But she inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders, and let the silence settle. Senator Hughes leaned forward. "Dr. Ellison, please begin with your statement." She pressed the button on the microphone. Her voice was calm but resonant. "Senators, thank you for inviting me. I am not here today as a symbol or as a politician. I am here as a woman who bought a ticket, boarded a plane, and was told that my dignity was negotiable. I was told that my seat could be taken from me, not because of error, but because of prejudice. I did not ask for this role, but I cannot ignore it, because what happened to me has happened to countless others who did not have the platform I do." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some senators nodded, others scribbled notes. She continued, her voice steady. "Discrimination is not turbulence to be smoothed over. It is a structural failure. And, like any failure in aviation, if unaddressed, it leads to disaster. Tonight I sit here not just for myself, but for every passenger who has been humiliated, dismissed, or silenced. Dignity is not optional. It is the foundation of safe travel." The phrase drew a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Reporters typed furiously, knowing they had their headline. Questions followed. Senator Green, known for his sympathetic stance, leaned forward. "Dr. Ellison, what reforms would you consider essential to address these systemic issues?" She answered without hesitation. independent reporting hotlines, annual anti-bias training with measurable outcomes, transparent investigations into passenger complaints, real accountability, not just apologies. Another senator, sharp in tone, challenged her. "Dr. Ellison, with respect, is it fair to destroy the careers of individuals like a captain or a flight attendant over what may have been a misunderstanding?" Maya looked directly at him. "Senator, misunderstandings do not strip confirmed passengers of their rights. Choices do, and choices have consequences. If a surgeon disregards a patient's chart and harms them, we don't call it a misunderstanding. We call it malpractice. Why should passengers expect less accountability in the skies?" The chamber stirred. Even those who disagreed could not deny the logic. The toughest questions came from Senator Whitmore, a skeptic known for grilling witnesses. He leaned back in his chair, voice laced with challenge. "Dr. Ellison, some have accused you of using your husband's position to escalate this incident beyond reason. How do you respond to claims that this was personal power wielded for personal grievance?" The words cut, but she had anticipated them. She clasped her hands, her voice unwavering. "Senator, my husband did not give me dignity. He defended it when others tried to strip it away. What happened that night was not a personal grievance. It was a public violation, and the evidence is there for all to see. If defending dignity requires power, then perhaps the true question is why it takes power at all." The room erupted with murmurs, half applause, half protest. The gavel banged for order. Maya's words had pierced the heart of the matter. Hours passed. She fielded more questions, some probing, some supportive, some openly hostile. Through it all, she remained composed, her calmness a quiet form of defiance. When it ended, the chair thanked her for her courage. Cameras flashed again as she rose, her legs trembling, but her posture unbroken. Ethan met her at the doorway, his hand pressing gently against hers, their eyes meeting in unspoken solidarity. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. "Dr. Ellison, do you believe Congress will act? Do you think this will change anything?" She paused on the steps, the morning sun glinting against the marble. Her voice carried above the crowd. "Change is not guaranteed by testimony. It is guaranteed by will. If those in power choose to listen, we can build safer skies. If they don't, then the public will remind them. Either way, the days of silence are over." Her words echoed across networks, her image frozen on screens worldwide. Commentators declared her testimony a turning point, a cultural moment that crystallized years of frustration. Some mocked her still, but the tide was shifting. Airlines issued hurried statements promising to review policies. Union leaders began negotiating new terms around bias training. Activists rallied behind her, their signs quoting her phrase, "Dignity is not optional." That night, Maya and Ethan sat in their living room, the television replaying highlights of her testimony. For the first time in days, she laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "Did you see Senator Whitmore's face when I answered him?" Ethan smiled. "You cut him sharper than a scalpel." Her laughter faded, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think it will matter?" Ethan's hand found hers. "It already does. The question is how far it will reach." Maya leaned against him, exhaustion washing over her. She knew the battle was not won. There would be more hearings, more resistance, more attacks. But for tonight, she had spoken her truth before the nation, and no one could take that away. Outside their window, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet scene inside. But somewhere in those streets, a young girl watched the broadcast and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll take my seat too." The days following Maya Ellison's testimony felt like the tremors after an earthquake. The nation was still shaking, still recalibrating. Everywhere she turned, her name was there on the evening news, splashed across newspapers, debated on podcasts. Dr. Ellison delivers blow to airline industry. FAA chief's wife becomes face of reform. Dignity is not optional. At first, Maya tried to retreat into her hospital work. She threw herself into surgeries, losing herself in the focus only medicine could demand. The operating room was a sanctuary, the only place where no one cared about hashtags or headlines. Yet, even there, she could not fully escape. Colleagues greeted her with admiration. Patients whispered gratitude. Interns treated her like an icon rather than a mentor. She longed for normalcy, but it remained just beyond her reach. Ethan, meanwhile, was deep in the machinery of Washington. Airline lobbyists swarmed Congress, desperate to blunt the force of her testimony. They argued reforms would cost too much, that pilots and crews were already overburdened. They painted her as an isolated incident, a single mishap magnified by politics. But Ethan was relentless. He reminded lawmakers of the videos, the public outrage, the fact that millions had watched discrimination unfold in real time. He presented data showing patterns, not exceptions. And he leaned on one unshakable truth: the skies could not be safe if they were not fair. Resistance remained fierce. Behind closed doors, airline executives complained of witch hunts. Anonymous op-eds accused Maya of seeking fame, of using her husband's power as leverage. Some television hosts dismissed her as overdramatic, insisting passengers should simply comply and complain later. Maya tried not to read the attacks, but sometimes they slipped through. One night, she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone despite Ethan's warnings. A commentator sneered in a clip she should have just taken the other seat. Instead, she wanted to be a martyr. Her chest tightened. She shut the phone and pressed her hands against her eyes. She whispered to herself, "I didn't want to be a martyr. I just wanted to get home." Ethan found her like that, her shoulders trembling. He sat beside her, saying nothing at first, only holding her until her breathing steadied. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Do you ever wonder if we should have stayed silent, if maybe it would have been easier?" He shook his head firmly. "Easier. Maybe. But right never. Silence would have told them they could do it again. And again. And again. You didn't choose this fight, Maya. It chose you. But you are winning it." She leaned into him, still weary, but steadied by his certainty. Across the country, cracks began to show in the industry's resistance. One airline announced mandatory de-escalation training. Another launched a passenger dignity task force. Even Transamerican, under Caldwell's strained leadership, rolled out its scholarship fund and hotline within weeks. The ripple was turning into a current. Yet, for every step forward, there was pushback. A group of terminated employees filed lawsuits, claiming wrongful dismissal. Catherine Walsh appeared on a talk show, tears streaming as she claimed she had been unfairly demonized. Social media tore her apart, but her defiance kept the controversy alive. Maya watched all of it from a distance, caught in a paradox. She wanted reform to succeed, but she hated that her face had become its symbol. She wanted the public to listen, but she longed for anonymity. Each day felt like walking a tightrope between duty and exhaustion. One evening she returned home late, finding Ethan at the dining table surrounded by papers. He looked up with tired eyes. The president's office called. They want to meet. Her stomach dropped. The president? Yes. He wants to commend you, to frame this as part of a national push for equity in transportation. Maya sank into a chair. Ethan, I'm a surgeon. I didn't ask to be in politics. I didn't ask to be anyone's symbol. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. I know, but symbols are chosen, not made. You're not just a surgeon anymore, Maya. You're proof. proof that dignity can't be denied quietly anymore. She sat in silence, staring at the papers scattered across the table, headlines, policy drafts, data reports. Her life was no longer her own, yet as much as she resisted, part of her knew she could not turn away. Too many eyes were on her. Too many voices depended on her. The following week, she stood in the Oval Office, cameras flashing as the president praised her courage. She smiled politely, shook hands, posed for photos. But later, in the quiet of the limousine ride home, she whispered to Ethan, "Do they care about me, or just what I represent?" He took her hand, maybe both, maybe neither. But what matters is the change they're forced to make. As the months passed, reforms gained momentum. The FAA drafted new guidelines, soon dubbed the Ellison Protocol, mandating anti-bias training and transparent reporting for all U.S. carriers. Airlines grumbled, but compliance became inevitable. Activists celebrated while critics fumed, and Maya remained at the center, whether she wanted it or not. She delivered speeches at universities, gave interviews reluctantly, stood beside Ethan at press conferences. Each time, she spoke with calm clarity. Her words simple, but cutting. Dignity is not optional. At night, though, when the cameras were gone and the house was quiet, she wrestled with herself. She worried about her patients, about the time she no longer gave them. She worried about losing herself to the symbol others had created. And, most of all, she worried about bitterness creeping into her heart. One night she stood at the window, looking out over the city lights. Ethan joined her, his arms circling her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "That this all started because I wanted to sit in the seat I paid for, and somehow it's turned into a national battle." He kissed her temple gently. Sometimes the smallest cracks break open the biggest walls. She nodded, resting her head against him. She didn't know where this path would end, but she knew one truth she could cling to. She had not broken. She had endured, and that endurance was changing the skies above her. The winter sun streamed weakly through the glass facade of Reagan National Airport as Maya Ellison adjusted the strap of her leather bag. Months had passed since that day on Flight 828, yet the memory remained vivid, etched into the very marrow of her being. The sting of humiliation, the shock of being told to move, the eruption of voices, and then the steady hand of Ethan arriving like a storm cloaked in calm. It all replayed at odd moments, unbidden, like a scar that still tingled in the cold. But today was different. Today was not about remembering. It was about reclaiming. She was scheduled to board a trans-American flight to Los Angeles, a flight deliberately chosen not by chance, but by symbolism. The very airline that had once stripped her dignity now wanted her to see, firsthand, the changes they had promised. The cameras were everywhere, discreet but undeniable. Journalists lingered, passengers whispered, crew members stood a little straighter, knowing they carried the weight of new expectations. As Maya approached the gate, she noticed the difference immediately. A new sign hung overhead, Passenger Dignity Protocol in effect. A digital kiosk invited travelers to report concerns anonymously. Staff wore pins shaped like open wings, a quiet nod to inclusivity. The energy felt taut, but not hostile. It was an air of accountability. Sandra Lopez, the gate agent who had once handed her humiliation like a boarding pass, was nowhere to be found. In her place stood a young man named Jordan, who greeted her with careful respect. "Good afternoon. Dr. Ellison." "Welcome aboard. We are honored to have you flying with us." His voice trembled slightly, as though the weight of history pressed on every syllable. Maya smiled gently, easing his nerves. "Thank you, Jordan. I'm just here to fly like everyone else." Yet she knew she was not just like everyone else. Not anymore. Stepping into the jet bridge, her heart pounded. Would she feel safe this time? Would the air of suspicion return? But as she crossed into the cabin, the purser greeted her warmly, gesturing toward her seat with unmistakable deference. Seat 1A. Dr. Ellison, it's yours. Always yours. She sank into the leather, her fingers brushing the armrest. A wave of emotion swept over her. The last time she sat in this position, she had been reduced to an afterthought, stripped of her humanity. Now, the seat had become a symbol of reclamation. It was no longer just a place to rest during a flight. It was proof that dignity could be defended, that humiliation could be rewritten into justice. The flight itself was uneventful, almost serene. Crew members checked in with passengers politely. No one raised their voice. No one questioned her right to be there. For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself to exhale, to lean back and feel what she had once taken for granted, the simple peace of being seen without prejudice. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles, she felt lighter. She walked through the terminal to find Ethan waiting, his smile tired but proud. Together they drove to a conference hall where the culmination of months of work was about to unfold the official announcement of the Thornton Now Ellison rule. The room was packed with journalists, lawmakers, airline executives, and community leaders. Cameras flashed as Maya and Ethan took their seats at the front. Richard Caldwell, looking visibly older, stepped to the podium first. His tone was careful, his words rehearsed. Today we acknowledge not just a failure, but a turning point. What happened to Dr. Maya Ellison must never happen again. Under the Ellison rule, all carriers will implement mandatory anti-bias training, independent reporting mechanisms, and annual public audits. Compliance will not be optional. Accountability will not be delayed. The applause was polite, but the real electricity came when Maya was asked to speak. She hesitated for a breath. Gathering herself, she had no script, only the truth she carried. When I boarded that plane months ago, I was just a tired passenger trying to get home. I didn't expect to become a story. I didn't want to be a symbol. But when dignity is taken from you in public, when humiliation is stamped onto your ticket, you cannot stay silent. I stood my ground because I had to. And because I stood, others stood with me. What began in one seat has grown into a movement that will shape every seat, on every plane, for years to come. Her voice caught for a moment, and the silence in the hall was thick with empathy. She pressed on. This is not just about me. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about every passenger who has been asked to shrink so that someone else can feel bigger. And it's about building an industry where fairness is not a favor, but a foundation. The crowd erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. Ethan watched from his chair, pride shining in his eyes. For all his maneuvering, for all his strategy, it was her voice, gentle but unyielding, that carried the day. The Ellison rule passed swiftly through regulatory channels. Airlines scrambled to adapt, some begrudgingly, others enthusiastically. Within a year, data showed a dramatic decline in reported bias incidents, a rise in passenger satisfaction, and a cultural shift among crews. The reform had teeth, and it was working. Maya returned to her surgical work, reclaiming her identity as a doctor, but the symbol remained. Patients called her the woman who changed the skies. Students asked her to mentor them, not just in medicine, but in courage. She resisted the pedestal, but she could not deny that her life had expanded beyond her choosing. One night, months later, she and Ethan sat on their porch under a canopy of stars. The air was cool, the crickets steady. Maya leaned back, a glass of tea in her hand. "Do you think this will last?" she asked quietly. Ethan considered before answering. Change always meets resistance, but once dignity has been demanded in public, it can't be erased. You've helped write it into the law. Maya, that's more permanent than any applause. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the starlight. It's strange. I never wanted this fight, but maybe this fight always wanted me. He took her hand, squeezing it gently. You didn't just fight, Maya. You won. And in that moment, surrounded by the stillness of the night, she felt the truth settle in her bones. The skies were not perfect, the world was not healed, but something fundamental had shifted. The next morning she would board another flight, perhaps unnoticed, perhaps once again whispered about. But whether she sat in silence or stood in the spotlight, one thing was certain. No one would ever again tell her she did not belong, because she did. She always had. And now the world finally knew it. What started as an ordinary flight became a defining moment in history. Dr. Maya Ellison's quiet strength in the face of humiliation forced an entire industry to confront the prejudice it had long ignored. From the gate to the cabin, from the boardroom to Congress, her voice echoed a truth too often silenced. Dignity is not optional. And yet, this story is more than headlines, more than viral outrage. It is a reminder of the small moments, the trembling hands, the quiet questions, the scars that linger long after the applause fades. It is a call to see each passenger, each human being, not as a seat number, but as someone who belongs, always. Maya reclaimed her place not just in seat 1A, but in history, and because of her, the skies are just a little safer, a little fairer for every traveler who comes after. But the question remains, how many more Mayas are out there, waiting for the world to recognize their worth? And will we stand with them when the moment arrives? If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us for the next chapter, where dignity and justice meet courage in the most unexpected places.